Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Martini Window. My name is Kevin Schultz, and unlike usual, with me today, we have a guest co-host in my friend and colleague, Miss Giovanna Morales Vargas. Giovanna, how are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for inviting me today to this. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be here with you all today.
Oh, man, what a great day to have you here, too. Our guest is a wonderful one. Director of such films as Julia, My Name is Pauli Murray, and the Academy Award nominated RBG, as well as producer of such films as Frida. We are very honored to have the incredible Miss Julie Cohen on our show. Julie, thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Love talking about other people's movies, probably more than I like talking about my own. So, here.
Oh, I totally understand that. And the movie today is, in my opinion, actually one of Tarantino's best, I personally think. We are speaking about, of course, the Nazi killing masterpiece, Inglourious Basterds. Oh, Julie, would you mind talking with us about why you wanted to talk about this today?
Yeah, there will be spoilers, correct? The movie's been around for a long time, and you cannot really talk about this film in depth or in any good way without there being tons of spoilers. It is actually a pretty plot-driven film. The reason I wanted to talk about this one, you know, is like how complicated my feelings are towards it. I mean, I think the film is totally brilliant as a film. I'm really blown away by all the things that Tarantino makes the viewer feel when you're watching a movie. And that's kind of like the way I judge a film is like how much it makes me care. Like I go to a movie, I want to care.
Yeah.
And like my biggest insult was like, yeah, I didn't really care that much. But like this one really, really made me care, made me feel all kinds of things. But it's not like, while I think it's a brilliant film, I would not say I love this film because it actually made me feel some things I didn't want to feel. I think Tarantino is doing that very intentionally, is trying to sort of take the viewer on an emotional journey and a journey that's pretty uncomfortable. And like some of the film which we could get into, but some of the film towards the end is about the experience of being a film audience member and how that can actually be kind of an uncomfortable place to be too. And I love it because it's not a movie about making movies, but it's very much a movie about watching movies. So I thought that was pretty profound, and I just think there's a lot of incredible things about the way the film is put together. I watched it again in preparation to come on a show and talk about it. What made me choose it right now is that there are themes of how people deal with authoritarianism and fascism. Are they collaborating? Are they standing up? There are good guys and bad guys in this film, and I do think there are echoes to our current situation in the US where we're kind of in the midst of a frightening growth of authoritarianism, which I don't shy away from saying anymore because I think it's true and I think it needs to be said. So the idea of Nazi occupied France is very much on my mind these days. Also, just watched the whole incredible French series called A French Village, which I've just been pretty deep into thinking about occupied France and how people deal with the situation and the different roles that people play. So it seemed like a good moment to talk about this film to me.
That is very poignantly said, for one thing. I definitely agree with you, and I will just, it's an authoritarian rise that's happening in America right now. That's no question. So just don't worry. You don't have to worry about saying that here.
Okay, this is something. Yes, I just wanted to also point out something that Julie said that I think is really interesting and add to that of the one very interesting idea of Inglourious Basterds is using cinema as a weapon too, right? Because that's where the film tells you is burning down the Nazis with film stock. And I think that was a really good way of putting something really meaningful that would have different meanings within the movie. That is something that I really enjoyed. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, I think that actually, I think really speaks to what Julie's saying here too. The idea you are saying is, in a way, it's not a movie about filmmaking, but you're saying it's a movie about watching movies. And I think I can actually totally attest to what you're saying here, or I agree with that rather. And I mean, you are right, like the power and what Gio's saying too, like using cinema as a weapon, art as a weapon. I mean,
Right.
certainly a rather visualized metaphor in this movie, but it's one I agree with completely. And I think that there's definitely something to be said there about how influence and propaganda really start to fuel us. I also just rewatched it recently in preparation for this, and just the character of Frederick Zoller was one in this particular watch through that I actually started noticing a lot more than I had in previous watches. You know, the idea of this guy who is seemingly, he tries to hold this sense of pride, and what I do isn't easy, but I do it for the sake of Germany or what have you, only to see at the end with Shoshanna, you know, in that wonderful scene in the projection room at the end where they both die, like he completely had the delusions of grandeur on him the entire time that were forced on him. And I think that partially, maybe that is the fact that he's being personified and playing himself in a propaganda film by Goebbels at the time. But I mean, I think it kind of plays back into what we're saying here about that cinema as a weapon or the power of watching movies in a sense.
Well, I often wondered, and we don't have Tarantino himself on this podcast, but I kind of wondered whether in some ways the Frederick Zoller and Goebbels are like supposed to be stand-ins for Tarantino himself. Whether there's something kind of deeply self-critical about this movie where, because like when the film is playing, I mean, we're sort of jumping to the end. I don't know if you go, you know, in order and such things, but
We don't go linear here. It's all good.
it's like when they are watching the film that's about celebrating, you know, the Nazi heroism and Nazi military prowess, and then, you know, very cleverly, the character Shoshanna and her colleague have turned it into something very different. But like the vanity that they're feeling as like the, you know, the filmmaking and acting vanity attached to what's on the screen, completely devoid of anything about the morals, is like what they're experiencing. They're vainly upset about like, oh, but what happened to our star turn? Like what happened to our great film? Just such a weird, interesting moment, of course, made more poignant by the fact that how many people are about to die in the film. But I just found it totally, totally interesting. And I'm interested that Frederick Zoller is the first person you mentioned, because for reasons I don't really remember why, I wrote, as I was watching this and taking notes, I wrote Frederick Zoller and put like a big box around it. So I must have had the same experience of, you know, when I had initially watched the film, not being as focused on him, and then being pretty drawn into that storyline.
And also, I think it plays into art, it plays into politics, how our ego takes over sometimes. And in this case, it's really clear how the vanity took over the politics and the main, either that terrible message they wanted to bring, but also who they were, how they were seeing themselves. So I think that's so important to talk about also how our egos and vanity plays into what we do, and that applies to arts and politics a lot. And we see it in the US nowadays, even in our politics here in Canada, we could talk about that too. So, yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong. It is true. I mean, this is also kind of all goes back to that theme of propaganda, of course, with Joseph Goebbels, and with it all kind of tying into the same thing. Like, think about even right from the get-go, when they move it from the Ritz and they move it to Shoshanna's theater, the very first way that Frederick is trying to sell this is, no, it doesn't matter that we're in France. You know, forget the French. This is a German night for German people. And it's like, at that point, that is so much of a posturing political statement before you've even started the event, to say that we're going to go to the middle of Paris and no Paris people are allowed except the people serving us. And it's kind of like you're creating propaganda of the propaganda.
Yeah, and I would like to ask Julie here something, because, you know, talking about Shoshanna's arc, actually, as a young Jewish woman seizing control of her narrative, it felt especially powerful. I really connected with that. So how do you see her role within the film? Do you think it connects to how women reclaim their stories in real life? Like, you know, with the work that you do as a documentary director, and I'm a big fan of the documentary you produced, Frida, and I'm a big fan of Frida Kahlo and as many other people. So, yeah, I wonder, how did you see her character, and just like she was reclaiming herself and taking control of her narrative and saying, we're going to burn this down and everybody's going to die because they all deserve it.
I think the whole arc we go on with Shoshanna from the start of the film, which I actually would love to talk about the start of the film in some detail, because that's what makes me want to talk about this film, because I think it's so incredible. You know, this is, even though the film is named after the group of extremely violent, vengeful, Jewish, I don't know if soldiers is even right, almost like paramilitary guys who were going after the Nazis in the film Partisans. Even though they're the Inglorious Bastards, but in my mind, it really is Shoshanna's story. And she's like the actress whose name is Melanie Laurent just does an incredible job. She's just entrancing through the whole film. We only meet her at the very end of that first scene. Can I talk about the first scene as long as this is okay?
Yeah, of course.
So let us talk about this first scene. I timed it out because I knew it was long. One thing that's really interesting about this film is how long the scenes are. And there aren't that many scenes compared to your normal narrative film. There's a couple scenes that are I looked it up to see like how many scenes are there in a usual feature film, and it's more like 50 to 70 scenes, and this film is more like in the 20 to 30 range, and there are a couple of scenes that are really, really long, including the opening scene, which I think is the best 17 minutes in cinema ever. Like, it's just so incredibly powerful, of Christoph Waltz as his just really incredible, calm, evil Nazi dude showing up at the farmhouse where the Christian French farmer is hiding Jews in his basement. And for the first like 7 or 8 minutes, you as the audience aren't told whether or not there are Jews hiding in that farmhouse, but you know there are, and you're just waiting as Christoph comes in, and he's like, he never is anything but like smiling and patrician and polite through the whole scene, which is what makes him so incredibly evil. It's a great performance, and I'm glad he won the Oscar for it. I think he won the best supporting actor Oscar. Was it? He was.
I believe he was. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. He's amazing, but he's just like most of the time he's just really charmingly and politely questioning the farmer about and there's always all these double meanings to what he's saying. When he first walks in the house, the first thing he says is, "Oh, it's true what everyone says about you in town." Like, so obviously the Nazi shows up when you're hiding this Jewish family, and the first thing you're thinking is, when it's true, like, it's true that you're, breaking the rules and hiding Jews here. But then he's like talking about how beautiful the guy's daughters are. Like, each daughter is more beautiful. And then he orders, he asks them, they say, "Would you like some wine?" And he asks for milk instead because it's a dairy farm, a scene that is echoed later in the film. Like, just even the way he's asking for milk and drinking milk, and you're just kind of waiting to see where, theoretically, if there are hidden people being protected there, but you just know there are. It's like you can totally feel it. You feel it in the farmer's nervousness. You feel it in how sure of himself Christoph Waltz is seeming as he's questioning. And then finally, at some point, like 7 or 8 minutes in, as they're conversing back and forth, the camera just tilts down super, super slowly down the farmer's leg, and then through the floor, and then under the...
I love that.
Where the Jewish... And, like, it gives you a chill when you're watching it. It gives me a chill thinking about it, actually. You're just like, it's just... And then the rest of the scene, you're just waiting to understand what's going to happen. Although, again, it's not going to end well for the hidden family. And Christoph Waltz is having his conversation with the French farmer in English so that the family doesn't understand it downstairs. And then when he brings in his Nazi friends to shoot everyone through the floor in this very brutal, deathly moment, Shoshanna is the one to escape. And as she runs across the field, and he tries to shoot her a couple times and misses, and she keeps running, and he says something like, "Oh, au revoir, Shoshanna." Like, he's sort of like, it just seems like he sort of finds the whole thing kind of amusing that the pretty daughter has sort of run off. And of course, he's going to meet her again later in the film. But from that point, like, the film really feels like her story. You understand the trauma that sets off all the action in the rest of the film. And the trauma was her hiding in fear and watching the rest of her family be brutally murdered, and then escaping and running and being strong enough to, to set up a whole new life and ultimately to be running this little movie theater.
Just watching that shot of her just leaving and running away from that moment. And one little character piece I actually want to point out is that Hans Landa, while he aims his gun, he never actually takes a shot.
Oh, he's
And
That's what I was thinking too.
he never takes a shot. And I think that's something very specifically decided in that moment.
I almost felt like he just let her go. Yeah, that was my feeling. Like, oh, he's letting her go for some reason, which it was really weird. But I think he didn't even shot her at all, or try to shoot her at all.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason he let her go, and I'm obviously nobody could see me, but I'm air quoting "let her go" right now. Part of the reason why is something I think ties into two different conversations in the movie. One, he talks about the nicknames and how proud he is of his nickname, the Jew Hunter, in that opening scene. Now, counter that with later on in the movie when he has Aldo Rain and the name escapes me, but they call him the Little Man in the movie, and he has the two of them in there, and he explains how much it's just a nickname, one that was given to me. There's a shift in his attitude between point A to point B of the war at that time, or what he's going to get out of it. And I think in that time, at the beginning, I feel part of it was, how do you say, ego or hubris, thinking, well, who cares if she runs off because I'm going to get her soon.
Right.
The Jew Hunter.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that just kind of has something to say about his hubris on that.
Yes. And then by the end, when he realizes that things are not going well for the Germans and he's actually just trying to negotiate his way out of the situation, is where things end with him attempting that. He has a little bit less hubris.
Yeah. And it's funny because, you're bringing up the opening scene, and I actually do agree with you. I think it was some of the best minutes in cinema history is that opening scene. I do agree with you completely, and one of the finest villain introductions I've seen.
Right.
But what I also love about it is there's a certain contrast here and a certain counter. So we see the opening sequence, and they're usually talking side by side. We always see them in two shots. One side of Hans Landa always either looking towards or looking down onto our dairy farmer. And if we look closely, there's not actually a lot of shots of Hans Landa soloed onto himself. And of course, the moment where he realizes that, oh no, he knows I have the Jewish people on our floorboards, we visually see the classic tables turn scenario where now we're framing them on two opposite sides of the frame there. Now counter this with after we get out of this whole sequence and we first see Aldo Rain, and I do like how we change the perspective. We're never seeing someone be at odds with somebody else. The first time we see Aldo Rain countered right after that, camera's right at him, showing him right in the commanding stance he's in. It is Shoshanna's story for sure, but I feel like there's a contrast there in how they set up the hero and the villain between a title card of each other.
Yeah. Interesting. And I want to say something about the acting, because I think there's a number of times where it's pretty unusual choices that I don't know whether it was Tarantino's choices or the actors or some combination, but is so effective in this film is how subtly and counterintuitive some of the acting is, particularly when you're talking about hero villain stuff. I mean, the way Waltz just plays, like, if you didn't speak English or German or French or whatever languages you're hearing him speak in sometimes throughout, would you understand? And you didn't know the story? Like, if you just were looking at his face, would you understand that he was evil? Or would you think, oh, what a nice, friendly, like, man he is who likes to chat about dairy products? Like, he has this way that's incredible. Another thing that I think is just amazing and such an unusual choice is the way in the scene that ends up, in my mind, being sort of the mirror scene to the opening scene, where just around the time that it's been decided that the Nazi propaganda film is going to show at Shoshanna's cinema, where she and Waltz are left to have, a coffee and conversation and whatever, and he's kind of taunting her, basically, because I assume, they never actually say this for sure, but I assume that he absolutely understood who she was and is just basically trying to torture her by repeatedly making references to cream and milk throughout their conversation. Like, of course she's terrified. They chose to play that with her not doing what someone would need to do. Like, she stays calm. She's not shaking. They never show her shaking. She actually holds it together because she has to, and she does it really well. And that you can somehow, from her acting, you feel how scared she is, even though she's managing to pretty much not betray this in her big scary moment with the Nazi. And then when the whole scene ends and she's finally alone, she does break, and then you see her, then she just lets all of her nervousness physically come out of her. She plays nervous by not by not play by playing the job of someone who's acting unnervous in the most terrifying possible situation. And I thought that was a really incredible choice on whoever part that choice came from. And I thought it made it like really, really powerful. I don't think she was nominated for an Oscar, but she really should have been. She's incredible. I think maybe Diana, is it Diane or Diane Kruger was?
I think Diana Kruger may have been nominated for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really think Melanie Laurent just does an incredible job in this movie.
I mean,
Yeah.
and if you think about it, like that's a lot of how women have to deal with things in society. Always holding it together, playing the strong role. Within families, for example, the woman in the family holding it together for everybody else,
Right.
helping each other to get things done. And while they're breaking down, I feel like when she was doing that, it was familiar to that reaction of like, I can do this, although I know what I'm doing, and I'm holding it together. And when she breaks, it's like you almost know that she's going to break down at the end when he leaves. I don't know. It's just the way that we are expected to be as women in general. I was touching on something else regarding hands. And it's like we know that those villain characters, we know how horrible they are. As we know, audiences very often fall in love with characters like that. And although we know that he's terrifying and horrible, there is some charm to this character. Why do you think audiences feel drawn to complicated characters from time to time?
Well, because in real life, that's what you find. Real people are complicated. Movie characters often aren't. For purposes of making a story easier to understand and making you connect with it right away, sometimes things are presented in a much more like everyone's an archetype. Like this person, the thing that comes to mind is the old tie the lady to the train track scene where the guy, you must pay the rent, and he's like he's the total villain, and then there's the hero that comes dashing in, just so that everyone quickly understands who everyone is in the role. People play things much less subtly than things happen in real life. Now, I actually think you can still make a great film when things are unsubtle. That can work, but really what makes this film so strong is the subtlety that's there, even though like Brad Pitt is not exactly playing this role. It's just like this kind of crazy, zany comic relief almost that's thrown in there. And like, like he sort of is giving you a little bit of like, I'm a moron, but yet he actually is quite competent at his leading his ragtag band of Nazi killers. So
It's kind of got the Columbo thing going on, Make them underestimate you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I absolutely love Brad Pitt in this movie. I just want to point that out. All the Rain, when I was rewatching it, the one thing that just struck to me is, and I really don't know how else to say this, but he's just so cool in that first command monologue he gives about the 100 Nazi scalps.
Right.
Like, oh my God, it just oozes charisma from that. And I think back to this because I don't know if you guys know, but Leonardo DiCaprio was actually lined up to play Hans Landa in this at first.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. He was doing a different movie at the time. I may have been a Scorsese flick that he was doing that he pulled out for, but it's one of those things like, Julie, exactly what you're saying about Christoph Waltz's performance in this, and like how if you didn't know about the stories, if you didn't know the languages, would you think he's a bad guy? And you're right, like he's incredibly charming in this movie, and that is almost more terrifying when you're talking about somebody who's called the Jew Hunter.
Right.
Exactly.
And you're right, though, in contrast, like Brad Pitt almost seems comical in this, but in reality, it's funny because to me, it's just when you're comparing it to everything else going on in the movie. Like you were mentioning Melanie Laurent's performance and just her doing so much with so little of her just lack of facial movements and everything in that strudel scene. Contrast that with the character who's supposed to be the Hollywood actor in this with Bridget von Haversmark. And in her case, very like Diane Kruger playing that perfectly as somebody who thinks they have this under control. And I think that there's a lot of back and forth comparisons I find in this movie, which will be easy to find in a 2.5-hour movie. But it's a lot of compare and contrast that kind of come to my mind like that. But I don't know, when you're mentioning that with the solo performances, that just kind of came to my mind if that was maybe something that was purposeful on Tarantino's part to kind of show all the different sides of these scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny. My husband sometimes in some movies will criticize a performance saying like this person seems like they're in a different movie. In this film, people do sometimes feel like they're in different movies from one another, and yet you feel like that's intentional and it totally works. So like That's I guess what I would say for that. And Brad Pitt is doing kind of a comical version of himself, sort of an uglier and comical version of himself, which he's done actually in a number of different films. What was Burn After Reading? Was that that good film? Where it's the same thing. Like he's kind of making fun of himself a little bit. Like it's not trying to be, he's not trying to be like hot.
I heard somebody say in the past about Brad Pitt, and this has always stuck to me about him, is I remember this quote one time: Brad Pitt is an incredible character actor stuck in the body of an A-list swimsuit.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that's true. That's true of George Clooney also, who that the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" performance, which actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Aldo Rain performance here. Just like it's a little bit not a real person, but it still totally works and is so fun to watch. And you're you're gripped by everything in this movie. It's actually not a short movie, but it doesn't feel like even the long scenes. The other scene that's super long, that's more than a half hour long, is the scene where Brigitte, or however they say her name, the glamorous German actor, is down in the basement bar on the night before the whole cinema plot is happening, and a bunch of things unfold, but most of it is structured around this like ridiculous kind of 20 questions type game that they're playing, where people put a card on their forehead saying the name of the person and other people are trying to guess it. And like there's like a whole vibe of frivolity, and yet again there's just this menace hanging over the whole situation because you're just waiting for the whole thing to end in violence, which of course it does, because that's how this film is every time. There's just, but like the fact that they let it go on way too long before it breaks down into the violent disaster it's going to, is part of what makes the scene so good. Like, it's not boring at all.
It is true. Your eyes are really not able to be taken off that scene as it's happening.
Yeah. And you know what I love about the structure of this film? That it almost plays like a novel, like with chapters. But I feel like each of the chapters almost feel like it's a short story, like short film that can stand alone.
Yeah.
If you take it out of the context, almost like you can just literally put that as a short film out there, and it has like beginning, middle, and end to that, So I really think that is a very effective way of telling the story of the specific film. Like, it was a really good way of telling the story. I really like that. And also the slow burn of the storytelling, because they're long dialogue-based scenes, very long, each of them, but you don't feel it. It plays really well to have it like a slow burn kind of storytelling way. I love that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Julie's saying, anybody can manage to pull off a 30-minute scene that's primarily dialogue and manage to keep your attention for the entire time is doing something right. That goes without saying. That scene, though, in the basement is just wonderful. And that's actually kind of where I love what I'm also saying earlier about, keeping your wits above yourself when you're in certain scenarios. I mean, again, here's Michael Fassbender's character, who's a film critic where he comes from. He's like the worst actor of the three here, trying to get through this whole situation of a case of a mission he's supposed to be leading through. And I find it fascinating because it's a lot of war movies I tend to find a very good job of perfective, and maybe not so much nowadays, but giving perfection to its hero or perfection to a certain level of side that we're supposed to be siding with. And what I thought was fascinating about Inglourious Basterds was that he was kind of showing, even though one side was the side that, is killing Nazis, they're not exactly all that put together themselves.
Right.
And I do find that kind of fascinating, that it shows kind of the strengths and weakness on the chain, on the side of the links of the chain on both sides.
Yeah, they're just first of all, there's very like a Keystone Cops type band of losers vibe about the Inglourious Basterds, but also like they're not that righteous. They just really enjoy the cruelty, like their whole scalping. They seem to, it's not like a decision to kill Nazis with some brutality in order to send a message or whatever. No, it's just like, no, screw that. We want to see blood. We want to make people feel pain. I mean, that's kind of part of when I talk about the movie making you feel some things you don't want to feel. Yeah, I actually never want to. I don't love the experience of really, like, personally, like in your gut, kind of rooting for violence and maybe feeling some catharsis at the sight of people, some of who might have varying degrees of guilt or innocence vis-a-vis the role they've played in the Nazi regime, like knowing they're going to get torn to shreds. Like, I actually, as a viewer, and I'll just add further, like as a Jewish viewer, like I don't love being in the situation of wanting to see that. And that was the situation that Tarantino not only puts me in, but then lets me know that I'm being put that way because, like, of course, I'm watching the Nazis watch something on the screen, but like, and they're enjoying the bloodlust of thinking like, oh yes, kill our enemies, and yet they're going to be killed. They're enjoying that until they're not, and it turns, and then like I'm watching them. And like, so like, am I better than that? Like, I'm rooting for blood also. So that's the way in which I say that the movie made me feel some things I didn't want to feel. So I appreciate its brilliance for that. But it's like, I'd rather a movie that made me feel love and wanting to hug everyone in it. And this is not that film.
Right. But I want to ask you a question, Julie, here. As a documentary director and producer, your work with truth,
Right.
but also shaping into a compelling story plays a big role in the work you do. How do you see the line between fact and storytelling? And what do you think of Tarantino's decision of completely rewriting history here, which obviously he's allowed because he's playing with fiction. But how do you feel about that?
Yes, I think that is totally fine. My feeling about that in narrative films is that it really depends. If you're making the audience think, most intelligent audience members might think that what you're showing is true, and then you're like biopics that are narratives, but that change all kinds of facts, but they feel kind of realistic, so you don't understand that, and then you're gonna think something happened that didn't happen at all. That actually can really bother me. In this film, it doesn't bother me at all. It is a revenge fantasy. It plays like a revenge fantasy. You don't think for a second, like, also, it's like, it's good because when you're dealing with World War II, you don't have to be too deeply knowledgeable to be like, oh, there was not a big moment where all my Nazis got locked in the movie theater and bombs went off and it was automatic weapons fired and then they all burnt to death also because the film is so flammable, which I assume that part is based on truth, but I don't even know. But like, it didn't, you got that it wasn't true. So, and I think that the thought experiment that he's trying to conduct sort of worked in that it's like an interesting question to mull over, like what would have happened if something like this exactly, because of course there were plots to kill Hitler that didn't work out, but like none of them were as good as this. Like none of them were sort of as poetic and whatever. So I think it's great. I will have to admit that because of my uncomfortable feelings vis-a-vis this film, I actually never saw Django Unchained, which I understand is a very similar premise. It's just the whole idea of a vengeance fantasy. I maybe felt even more uncomfortable about the notion of me seeing that. As I said, I am Jewish, I'm not Black, and like having someone else's vengeance fantasy seemed like even creepier than like being placed into my own. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing to try, and I appreciate that he did it so well. But like, I found it a little bit painful to be placed in situation of rooting for violence, because I actually don't want to root for violence.
That's actually quite a fascinating perspective to hear. I mean, I'm not a Jewish person, so I don't have that same perspective. I can't have that same perspective or point of view where you're from. So that's really interesting to hear because I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I don't know if I don't know what Tarantino's faith is, but it's just interesting hearing you say that because it kind of does seem like this was a revenge fantasy towards killing Nazis.
Well, I mean, the very last thing that happens in the movie that they've created and tacked on to the end of the propaganda film is the face of Shoshanna, strangely like lit up to no longer be beautiful when she's like one of the most beautiful women that's been on screen. Like, she's so beautiful. The large black and white blow up of her face where she doesn't look so pretty. And she says, I am the face of Jewish vengeance. And it's like a very powerful moment. Like, she's saying that to an audience who are like literally being killed as they're hearing her say that. Certainly for cathartic reasons, I was rooting for those people to be killed, but I didn't really like being in that place.
Right.
In that position, correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have to talk about the last chapter or the third act in this case. Like how beautifully shot that is. Like
Oh,
it's so gorgeous. Like it's just as one of the best. I don't even know how to explain that. I'm in love with the way that it was shot, the colors. Even when the Freddy Solar goes up there to see Shoshanna and when they kill each other. Even like I know it's violence but even that it was played the way that it was shot, the music, it just played so beautifully.
I mean, in fact, I didn't bother to look this up. I got the feeling when I was watching that this time that there were maybe some cinematic references in what we were seeing there that I didn't know what he was referring to, but I kind of felt like that scene felt like a very classic old movie kind of scene.
you're talking about the scene.
It looked very theatrical, right? Very theatrical.
Yeah, and the fact that they're obviously having it in a projection room and her very memorable red dress, even the incredible scene where she's getting made up and ready for the evening, looking like an old Hollywood film noir type, but like she's getting ready to kill everyone. If you just followed her part from that through the nightmare in the projection room, it felt very old Hollywood to me. Like it felt very glamorous, almost.
It did feel very glamorous.
I mean, it was almost I could swear they were doing a gauze shot, like from the old Ingrid Bergman shots from like Casablanca, you know, the gauze shot. I just want to point out something from earlier. You were mentioning about the nitrate film. I had to look this up. So it turned out the nitrate film, yes, 3 times more flammable than paper, and the 1937 Fox Vault fire over at Fox Studios is actually what phased it out.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, because as I was saying that, I was like, actually, I kind of remember that there have been a number of situations where some of the great films have been lost because there have been fires, but that's just like yeah, it's a really interesting reference. And until you had said this, Giovanna, I had not really thought. I think film as a weapon is exactly what he means. That's what the Nazis were creating in the film that they're showing. I forget the name of the fictional film that they call it within the
Nation's Pride.
The Nation's Pride, yeah. Film is a weapon in Nation's Pride. Film is a weapon in the fake version Shoshanna and her lover have created to stick it to the Nazis. And then film is a weapon in what Tarantino has created that we're all watching. So
I didn't see it that way either, but yeah, you're right. That makes total sense. And also tying it up with Tarantino being not just a filmmaker or a director, writer, but a film buff himself, right? Like he loves film, he loves movies. And so it seems like tying that up with something related to film and using it as this powerful tool that it is for us, people who create films. It's a way to tell the world many different things within the film itself and outside the film, if that makes sense to you.
right.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. And it's pretty fascinating because you were mentioning earlier about the projection scene and just some of the movie references in there. I mean, this movie, we could do an entire episode just listing off the movie references in this movie if it is Tarantino. I mean, the title alone is taken from an Italian film, and then the premise itself is almost a stripped down version of The Dirty Dozen. So it's right from the get-go of the principles of this film, we're kind of seeing those sorts of influences. But one thing I do want to say too, because Gio, you're talking about the last scene of the theater, and I love so many images from this sequence. Robert Richardson shot the hell out of this movie. And one thing that doesn't get enough attention about this was actually the last film that Tarantino ever did with his editor, Sally Menke, may she rest in peace. She passed away shortly after this film came out. And I think that there is a structure to that storytelling that, frankly, I think he hasn't been there's been a difference between the pre and post Sally Menke Tarantino movies, in my opinion. Her editing lent such a beautiful level to the storytelling. And when you see scenes like that projection scene and you see the fire or the scene at the opening, you see all these iconic scenes. I think we've mentioned like 5 or 6 scenes in this movie that have gone down as like iconic scenes in history. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that both Rob Richardson and Sally Menke's work on this was just incredible.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of Sally Menke before. I wrote her name down and looked her up because as I'm watching, I'm like, wow, who edited this movie? It's incredible. Like when I'm seeing a doc, I tend to judge it as a filmmaker, and I'm thinking about that kind of stuff all the time when I'm watching like a regular movie, or sometimes I hate to say this, but in my mind, I'll say like a real movie. I tend to not really think through the technical side of stuff too much, and it's only watching it in the context of thinking about talking about it in a film kind of way that I did. Like I definitely noticed particularly editing, yes, also the cinematography, but also can we please talk about the music, like whoever was the mean, I think it may have had some composed music. Also, like the opening scene, like the music is so odd, and so effective. There's the opening scene, which has like a lot of sort of spaghetti western type influences in it. It has some, you know, weird, like sort of beautiful Euro guitar that sounded almost to me like the Gypsy Kings, you know, that Spanish guitar band. And
Right.
I thought I was also hearing like some Beethoven, some notes of Beethoven like woven into the whole thing. And
Yes,
yeah,
and for Elise.
oh right, for Elise, yeah. So it's like you're getting this whole mix of stuff that's really creating a cool mood, but you're also like, what is this? This is like, you know, really unusual. And I was watching, you know, at the end of the movie, which this I often do, no matter what movie I'm watching, I like to see all the song credits at the end. And there was just a lot of stuff that I had not heard of before that was really incredible in terms of the music that they licensed for. I just thought the music in this film is both very weird and incredible.
You know, one of my favorite instances of that is actually that scene we're talking about earlier where, you know, where she's getting ready for it. You see the beautiful red dress, the veil over her face, and we're playing the theme song to the 1982 movie Cat People done by David Bowie.
Yes, right. Why? Right. Right. Where's David Bowie coming in there? Why is that? I mean, I'm old enough to remember when that felt like I was in high school when that film came out, and it was a very big deal. I think Tarantino and I are around the same age, actually. It was a very big deal among people who thought of themselves as cool, artsy people.
Right.
Everyone loved that song and that movie. But like, right, no, why are we getting that? It's obviously totally an anachronism. It is making a reference to like, you know, flammableness, like we're getting into fire, like things are gonna burn down. But like, yeah, no, again, like if you had told me that on paper, I would have been like, yeah, no, don't do that, Quentin. It's too stupid. And then, yeah, it played incredibly, I thought, because it is a great song.
And it is. And what's funny is that the song itself, in reference to the Cat People from the original movie, the song itself is about people not realizing the threat that you are when they oversee you. So it's actually like the lyrics to the song are things like, you know, see these eyes so green, I could stare for 1,000 years, colder than the moon, it's been so long, feel my blood and rage, it's just fear of losing you, don't you know my name? Well, you've been so long. Like, it's very related to where Shoshanna is at her character arc in that movie even. So it's a really fun deep cut that Tarantino's pulling out, but actually for, you know, if you're going to pull maybe modern's maybe putting it a little bit weird, it came out in the 80s, but putting an anachronistic song, I mean, it works quite well in my opinion, but also tone-wise, it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
I think Inglourious Basterds is my favorite film, and he's of Tarantino, and he's probably his best film, in my opinion. Everything plays so well for him to create this amazing piece of art. It's a very artistic film. Obviously, Tarantino is a great director, writer, etc. His films were always elevated by his writing, and you see that in Pulp Fiction, etc. But I think that all the components in this film make a really artistic, really cohesive piece of art, which I think is his most beautiful film that he's ever made.
Yeah, it is definitely certainly a gorgeous film. I always kind of felt like his influences for this movie seemed to derive very much from the era of like John Ford, stuff like that, which wasn't really something I think we'd seen from him in his previous films. Obviously, his earliest work, like Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, were very influenced by Korean cinema for a lot of it. But I don't know, Inglourious Basterds was the first time where I saw one of his movies where I thought he's really taking influence from the golden age of American directors to me in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
It's been a very wonderful time chatting about this movie, Julie. I really do appreciate you bringing it onto the show and bringing yourself onto the show.
Well, it was great to be here.
Thank you very much. And before we sign off here, is there anything you have coming up? Anything you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, that is always an interesting question. You know, I love to send people to see films that are easily seeable that I've made, and one that people might know a little bit less about that you can watch, I think, on Peacock now or rent pretty much anywhere is called Everybody, about the intersex rights movement. It's a Focus Features doc that I made a couple years ago, so I'm totally into that. I actually have started filming something a little more relevant to our conversation, having to do with the Nazi era, but resistance to the Nazis, people resisting with words, that film. It was called White Rose, about a movement of anti-fascist German Christian students. I've had Nazi stuff on my mind lately, and it was good to sort of go back. I mean, there's always the fear, especially in a situation like this, where it's like I'm blurting out like, oh, I want to talk about Inglourious Basterds because it's so amazing. And then you think like, am I going to go back and watch it and not love it as much as I did when I first saw it? And that wasn't my experience at all. I thought it was amazing. I had the same reaction. And I was more prepared for the emotional thing of like, oh, it's going to be hard because I'm going to root for the brutal killing of Nazis. And I really like rooting for violence in that way. And so it was sort of probably less painful. I mean, I would say, and maybe this is how he matured as a filmmaker, I saw Pulp Fiction in the theater when it first came out and thought it was like the most incredible thing ever. I probably loved it a little less when I watched it more recently, just like, oh yeah, let's watch that again. The film has kind of moved in his direction in such a way that it felt a little bit less innovative now than it did when it was. It also felt a lot less violent. I remember when seeing it in the theater, you're like, oh my God, can you believe how violent that film is? And then
I felt the same way about Pulp Fiction that I showed to my younger brother the other day, and I was less enthusiastic or excited about it. I was like, it's okay.
Yeah, it was very funny. It was stylistically good, but the thing that I think blew us away seeing it much earlier was how innovative it felt. It's like the sort of whole style of being super funny and ironic towards brutal violence has become, thanks to Tarantino, a lot more popular. So it just has a little bit less of an impact when you see it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's fair to say that there's probably a direct line of connection from Pulp Fiction to movies or to TV shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Julie, thank you so much for being on our show. I would love to have you back on in the future. And Gio, thank you so much for stepping in for Kayla today as co-host.
Of course, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you, Kevin, for inviting me.
All right, Julie, thank you very much for being on our show. Everyone, have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, you.
Hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. If you'd like to show your support, then visit martiniwindow.com and come buy us a coffee or buy yourself some merch.